The cable arrives at 22:47. You read it twice, then you sit with it for 3 minutes and do not move. The cable is from the CIA station in Frankfurt, relayed from a source inside the Soviet military command structure in East Germany. The content is precise and alarming. Soviet forces in the Western Military District have, in the last 48 hours, moved to a level of readiness not seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Nuclear-capable aircraft are being fueled and positioned. The signals traffic from Moscow is running at 10 times its baseline volume. Senior KGB officers who have been at their residencies in Eastern Europe have been recalled to Moscow without explanation. The analyst in you reads this the way you have been trained to read it. You assess the source, reliable, access confirmed, no prior fabrication. You note the correlation with other signals you have seen in the last 10 days. You consider what this means. Operationally, for the station and for the assessment you will need to file before 6 in the morning. And then a second part of you, the part that has been running alongside the first part for 14 years, the part that most people in this building would have you arrested for, the part that knows things about this situation that the cable cannot tell the analyst. That part of you understands something the cable does not say. You know why the Soviets are moving to nuclear readiness? You know, because 3 weeks ago you told them something you should not have told them. And it may have been a mistake you cannot now take back. And if you cannot take it back, then the thing happening on the other side of the wall right now, the mobilization, the fueled aircraft, the recalled officers, the lights burning in Moscow at 3 in the morning. Maybe, in some part you will never be able to measure precisely, something you caused. The cable is on the desk. The fluorescent light is on the ceiling. West Berlin is outside. You light a cigarette and think about Vienna. Vienna in 1969 is where the world's intelligence services go when they want to have conversations. They cannot have anywhere else. It is neutral ground. Austria is not NATO, not Warsaw Pact. The Soviet embassy is large and active. The American embassy is large and active. The city has been dividing the two worlds across cafe tables and park benches and carefully maintained cover stories since 1945, and it has developed a particular talent for looking in a different direction at the right moment. You are 29 years old. You have been with the agency for 4 years. Your posting to Vienna station is your second overseas assignment. You are, by the assessment of your superiors, a capable and promising young officer with a talent for languages. You speak German and Russian to a standard that most CIA officers never reach, and a particular gift for what the trade calls access development. Making people trust you, making people tell you things. You're sitting in a cafe on the Schottengasse on a Tuesday afternoon in October when a man sits down at your table without being invited and orders coffee for both of you. His name, he tells you, is not the name he gives you. He is a senior officer of the KGB's first chief directorate, responsible for operations in Western Europe. He has been watching you for 6 months. He knows your apartment address, your dead drop locations, your current development targets, and the name of the source you have been running inside the Austrian Foreign Ministry. He is not here to threaten you. He is here to make you an offer. You sit across from him for 2 hours. You listen to what he has to say. You do not agree immediately. You are trained not to agree to anything immediately, and he knows this and respects it. You tell him you will think about it. He gives you a phone number and a time to call it. You think about it for 9 days. What happens during those 9 days is a private thing that you have never fully described to anyone, and you will not fully describe it now. But here are the parts that matter. You think about the things the CIA has done since 1953 that you know about from the inside. The overthrows, the black programs, the counting of people who were considered acceptable losses. You think about the things the KGB has done since 1917 that you know about from the outside. You think about whether there's a moral difference, and you come up with an answer, and the answer is yes, there is a difference. And the difference is not large enough to serve as the kind of absolute certainty that would allow you to dismiss what the man in the cafe offered. You think about money, which you tell yourself is not the reason, and which is also not entirely not the reason. You think about what it means to have access to both sides of the most consequential intelligence competition in human history, and whether that access might, under certain circumstances, save lives in a way that serving only one side could not. You call the number. The conversation lasts 4 minutes. What you become that night has a name in the intelligence business: a double agent, a penetration, a mole. The names are all slightly wrong for what it actually feels like, which is this: you become two people who are the same person, running parallel lives inside a single body, and the work of the next 14 years is to keep those two lives from ever being in the same room at the same time. Here's what serving two intelligence services simultaneously actually means. Not the film version, not the Cold War thriller version. The real version. Both services know in the abstract that double agents exist. Both services run counterintelligence programs designed to find them. Both services have at various points concluded that you're completely reliable. You have contributed to both conclusions. This is the work. For the CIA, you're a case officer who has over 14 years developed extraordinary access to Soviet operations in Europe. The intelligence you provide, the real intelligence, not the managed intelligence, but the material that tells the agency what the KGB is actually doing in West Germany and Austria and France, is genuine. You do not fabricate it. You do not degrade it. You pass it clean. because a double agent who passes degraded intelligence is a double agent who eventually gets caught. Your record inside the agency is excellent. For the KGB, you're something rarer and more valuable. A senior CIA officer with direct access to Western strategic intelligence, and after your posting to Berlin Station in 1979 to the planning and operations of the most important CIA station in the world, what you give them is also real. Some of what you have given them has resulted in the deaths of Soviet citizens who were working for Western intelligence. You know their names. You have counted them. The counting is something you do when you cannot sleep, which is often 5 names. In 14 years, 5 people on the Soviet side who were passing intelligence to the agency were identified and arrested, and in 3 of the 5 cases executed as a consequence of information you provided to your KGB handler. You tell yourself the arithmetic works, that the intelligence you extract from the Soviets through your KGB access has saved a larger number of lives than 5, that the operational damage you have done to Western intelligence services is offset by the operational insight you have given them, that you are, in some sense that cannot be verified and may not be true, a moderating force in a competition between 2 systems that are otherwise perfectly happy to destroy the world. You tell yourself this, 5 names. The counting does not stop. Berlin is the right city for what you are, in a way that no other city in the world could be. West Berlin in 1,093 is 48 kilometers behind the Iron Curtain, surrounded by East Germany, connected to the West only by air corridors that are maintained by Cold War agreements that could theoretically be withdrawn. It is a city under perpetual low-grade siege, conscious of its own symbolic importance, and consequently a city that has developed an extraordinary tolerance for the strange and the unresolved. West Berliners have been living inside a geopolitical contradiction for 30 years, and they have, with characteristic German efficiency, made the contradiction into a feature of daily life. The CIA's Berlin station at this point in the Cold War is the largest and most active CIA station in the world. It has a staff of several hundred. It runs operations across the wall into East Germany and beyond. It is the primary collection point for intelligence on Soviet and Warsaw Pact military dispositions in Central Europe. Whatever happens to the world, whatever nuclear scenario is being gamed in Washington or Moscow or NATO headquarters in Brussels, the answer to how it unfolds will be shaped in some measure by what Berlin Station knows and what it has told the people who make the decisions. You have been at Berlin Station for 4 years. You're a senior officer. You have an office and a secretary, and access to compartmented programs that most people at your level do not have access to, because you have accumulated 14 years of operational performance and the trust that comes with it. Your KGB handler for the Berlin period is a man you meet in East Berlin 2 or 3 times a year, through the checkpoint at Friedrichstrasse. You cross with a cover legend, a business contact, a property matter, the kind of thing that a senior American official might plausibly have reason to manage in the East. The meetings last between 40 minutes and 2 hours. They take place in apartments that change each time, in neighborhoods near the Prenzlauer Berg in the Mitte, behind drawn curtains in the flat gray afternoons of the East Berlin winter. His name is Volkov. You have known him for 8 years. He is intelligent, careful, and has a quality of attention and conversation that you associate with people who are genuinely interested in what they are being told rather than simply recording it. In a different world, in a different city, you might have liked him in this city. What you have instead of friendship is the specific professional intimacy of 2 people who are each, in their own way, performing a role for the other, and who are each, in their own way, aware that the other is also performing, and who have arrived over 8 years at something that functions like trust while being built entirely on its opposite. He asks you questions. You answer them. Some of the answers are complete. Some are not. He knows this. You know he knows. The arrangement has held for 8 years because the intelligence you provide is good enough that the KGB is not motivated to test whether it is complete, and because you're careful enough that the test, if it were applied, would not be conclusive. In October 1983, Volkov asks you a question that is different from the others. You need to understand what is happening in Moscow in the autumn of 1983, because without it, the question Volkov asks you makes no sense. Yuri Andropov, the General Secretary of the Soviet Communist Party, is a former KGB director who believes, with the specific conviction of a man who has spent his career studying Western covert operations, that the United States is preparing a nuclear first strike against the Soviet Union. This is not paranoia in the clinical sense. It is a risk assessment informed by everything he knows about American strategic doctrine under Reagan, about the deployment of Pershing II missiles in Western Europe that are capable of reaching Moscow in 6 minutes, and about what he would do if he were in Reagan's position. In 1981, the KGB and GRU jointly launched Operation Ryan, Raketno-Yadernaya Napadini, nuclear missile attack. It is the largest peacetime intelligence collection program in Soviet history, and its single objective is to detect the signs that the United States is preparing to launch a first strike. KGB residencies across the world are given checklists, indicators to monitor, changes in blood bank donation rates, lights in government buildings at unusual hours, movement of senior officials, signals traffic anomalies. The logic is a nuclear first strike cannot be launched without preparation, and preparation leaves traces, and the job of every KGB officer in the world, from 1981 onwards, is to watch for the traces. Berlin Station is aware of Ryan. You are aware of Ryan from both directions. The CIA knows the Soviets are running a heightened collection program. The KGB knows that Berlin Station is aware of Ryan, which means that any intelligence coming from Berlin about Western military preparations is read with the additional weight of, is this information being managed to deceive us about a first strike? This is the context in which Volkov, at the meeting in East Berlin in October 1983, asks you a direct question. He says NATO is running a major exercise in early November, Able Archer 83. It simulates a nuclear escalation scenario from conventional conflict through to strategic nuclear release. Our signals intelligence is indicating that the exercise is being conducted with unusual realism. Actual nuclear-capable units are participating. Actual release procedures are being simulated. Is this exercise what it appears to be, or is it a cover for actual preparatory activity? He is asking, is NATO about to start a nuclear war under the cover of a war game? You know the answer. Able Archer 83 is a NATO exercise. It is a genuine exercise. It is not a cover for actual military action. The reason it is being conducted with unusual realism is precisely what NATO would tell you if you asked. Realism makes exercises more useful. The planners in Brussels and Washington are trying to stress test their procedures. There's no first strike being prepared. The missiles are not being fueled. You know this with certainty because Berlin Station has been briefed on Able Archer at a level of detail that leaves no ambiguity. You tell Volkov, the intelligence I have access to indicates that Able Archer is a genuine exercise. You tell him this, clearly, directly. And then in a decision that you will think about for the rest of your life, in a decision that seems at the time like a small calibration, and in retrospect seems like something else, you add 3 words, but I'm not certain. You say these words because you have been running the double life for 14 years, and you have learned that expressing uncertainty about your own intelligence makes your intelligence more credible. A source who is always certain is a source who is being managed. A source who occasionally expresses doubt is a source who is telling the truth. You have used this technique successfully for over a decade. You say these words because you are in some part of your professional instinct that has become separate from your moral judgment, operating as a double agent, optimizing for continued access, rather than as a person transmitting a truth that may prevent a catastrophic misunderstanding. Volkov hears, but I'm not certain, and he transmits to Moscow. CIA source with direct access to Berlin Station indicates Able Archer is likely a genuine exercise, but expresses uncertainty about whether it is a cover for preparatory activity. 3 words. The 3 words that, when they arrive in Moscow, combine with everything else the KGB and GRU are reading: the signals traffic, the participation of actual nuclear units, the unprecedented realism of the exercise, the political context of Reagan's evil empire speech in March, the deployment of Pershing IIs in West Germany in October, into a picture that looks from the Soviet side of the equation, terrifyingly close to what Operation Ryan was designed to detect. On November 8 and 9, 1983, Soviet forces in the Western Military District begin to move to a level of readiness not seen since 1962, and the cable is on the desk in front of you at 22:47, and you have been sitting with it for 3 minutes, and you understand what has happened. You have a choice. You can report the Soviet mobilization to your CIA superiors and say nothing else. This is your professional obligation. The cable is in front of you. The station chief will expect to report you file the intelligence, you flag it as a potential real-world indicator rather than exercise-related noise, and the rest is someone else's responsibility. This is what the agency pays you to do. In this version, you're a CIA officer who correctly reported alarming Soviet activity during a period of high Cold War tension. You're not responsible for why the Soviets are mobilizing. The question of what role your 3 words may have played in that decision is a question no one will ever ask you, because no one knows you told Volkov you were not certain. Or you can do something that has no clean name in the operational vocabulary you have been using for 14 years. You can find a way, indirect, deniable, careful, to send a signal to Volkov and through Volkov to Moscow that the 3 words were wrong, that Able Archer is a genuine exercise, that the uncertainty you expressed was a professional habit rather than a substantive assessment, that the mobilization they are sustaining right now is based on a misreading of the intelligence landscape that you helped create. To do this is to tell the KGB that you have been more reliably CIA than they believed. It is to damage your credibility as a Soviet source in a way that may not be repairable. It is to choose at a moment when the stakes of the choice are as large as stakes have ever been in 14 years of maintaining this particular balance, one side over the other. There's a third version, which is the version you think about last and dismiss because it is not possible. You tell the CIA what you told Volkov and what Volkov told Moscow and why. You explain the 3 words. You accept what comes next. This version exists only in the abstract. You sit with this for 40 minutes, then you pick up the telephone, you call the emergency contact number that is used in the operational architecture you have maintained with Volkov for 8 years. Only in situations where waiting for a scheduled meeting would create unacceptable risk. You leave a specific coded message. The message, translated from the protocol you established with Volkov in 1978, means disregard the uncertainty expressed at last meeting. Assessment revised to high confidence. The exercise is genuine, you say. In other words, I was wrong. Or, I was being careful and the caution was itself the error. Or, I am choosing you right now over the other thing because the other thing is preferable to the world it might otherwise become. You do not know which of these is the correct interpretation of what you're doing. You will not know for years. What you know on the night of November 8, 1983, sitting in a CIA station with a cable about Soviet military mobilization on the desk in front of you, is that you are a man who has maintained two lives for 14 years by never allowing the two to intersect. And tonight they have intersected. And the instrument of the intersection was three words that you said out of professional habit in a room in East Berlin 3 weeks ago. Not, but I'm not certain. That is not a confession. That is a tradecraft reflex, and it may have been the most consequential reflex of your life. Here's what happens after. November 8, 1983. The Soviet mobilization stands down within 72 hours of your emergency message. Whether this is because of your message or because Abel Archer concludes on schedule and Soviet signals intelligence reads, the stand down of NATO forces as confirmation that the exercise was genuine, or because of some other factor in the intelligence assessment that you have no visibility into, you never know precisely. The mobilization ends. The aircraft return to their bases. The lights in Moscow at 3 in the morning go back to being ordinary lights. In an ordinary bureaucracy managing an ordinary empire. The world does not end. This is not a small thing. In the classified literature that emerges decades later when the Soviet archives are partially opened, when former intelligence officers write their memoirs, when historians are able to compare the American and Soviet assessments of November 1983 and understand how close the gap between exercise and miscalculation was. Abel Archer 83 is described by some analysts as the moment the Cold War came closest to becoming something else. The Reagan administration is later reported to have been genuinely alarmed by the intelligence it received about Soviet mobilization during the exercise. A subsequent CIA assessment concludes that Soviet fears of a NATO first strike were real and operationally significant. Gordievsky, the KGB officer working for British intelligence, who is the other side of this particular story, will later say that Abel Archer brought the world to the edge of something that most people in the West did not know was happening. You know what was happening? You know, something more specific, which is that you were inside it. In 1989, the wall comes down. You're watching it on a TV in an apartment in Washington, having left Berlin Station the previous year. You watch the footage of people on top of the concrete, and you feel something, not joy exactly, not the simple release, that you see on the faces of the Berliners who are tearing at the wall with hammers. Something more complicated. The wall was the condition of your life for a decade. The existence of two Berlins, two systems, two realities, two sides that both needed someone who could move between them was the precondition for what you were. The wall falling does not mean you are resolved. It means the stage you were performing on has been dismantled. In 1990 and 1991, the Stasi files begin to be processed. The Ministry for State Security of the German Democratic Republic maintained what is now understood to be the most comprehensive surveillance record in human history. Approximately 1 in 63 East German citizens was an informant. The files, when they are opened, run to 111 kilometers of shelving. They contain the names of thousands of Western intelligence officers who were identified, tracked, and in some cases turned or neutralized during the Cold War years. Your name is not in the Stasi files. This is not because you were not watched. It is because of something more interesting. The KGB maintained a separate file on you that was not shared with the Stasi. You were a KGB asset. You were their asset. The Stasi were not given your name because the KGB did not share its most valuable penetrations with Allied services it did not fully trust. Which means that when the Stasi files are opened and processed and published and cross-referenced with CIA personnel records, your name does not appear. For several years, this seems like a resolution. It is not a resolution. In 1995, a former KGB officer defects to British intelligence and provides, among other things, a partial list of Western intelligence personnel who served as Soviet assets during the Cold War period. Your name is on the list. You're 73 years old. You're retired. The CIA investigation that follows is thorough, extended, and professionally devastating. You do not deny what you did. You explain it in the only terms that you have, which are the terms you have been using internally for 30 years. The dual access, the lives saved against the lives lost, the counting, the 5 names. The decision on November 8, 1983, the people conducting the investigation. Listen carefully. They are professionals. They are genuinely trying to understand what you were and what you did, not simply to assign blame. Because understanding is operationally useful and blame is only emotionally satisfying. One of them asks, do you believe you prevented nuclear war? This is the question you have been sitting with for 12 years. Your honest answer is I do not know. There are too many variables I cannot see. The Soviet mobilization stood down. What caused it to stand down is not something I have full information about. I made a choice on November 8th. That was intended to correct a mistake I had made 3 weeks earlier. And the world continued, and I cannot tell you with certainty that those two facts are connected. There is a silence in the room after you say this. Then the investigator asks, and the 5 people who were arrested and executed because of the intelligence you passed to the KGB. You say, I count them. He says, what does that mean? You say, it means I know their names. It means I have been counting them since 1972, and I will be counting them until I'm no longer able to count anything. It means the arithmetic I told myself I was performing, the lives saved against the lives lost, is not an arithmetic that is ever balanced. And I knew when I started that, it probably would not, and I made the choice to start it anyway. And I have been living inside that choice ever since. He writes something in his notebook. You do not know what he writes. What you know is this. You spent 30 years moving between two systems that each believed they were protecting the world from the other, and each of which was, in its own way, correct. The Soviet Union was a genuine threat to the liberties of people who lived under it and beyond it. The United States was a genuine threat to the sovereignty and stability of countries, it considered strategically important. These things were both true. They remain true. The Cold War was not a story with a hero. You chose to be inside both versions of it simultaneously, for reasons that were never entirely pure and never entirely corrupt. And the consequence of that choice is a ledger that you cannot close because you do not have all the information needed to close it. 3 words. But I'm not certain. Not an ideology. Not a betrayal in any cinematic sense. A reflex, a professional habit deployed in the wrong moment by a man who had been maintaining two selves for so long that the boundary between operational calculation and genuine judgment had become in certain moments difficult to locate. You're not the person who caused the Cold War. You're also not the person who prevented anything. You're a man who stood at the intersection of two systems that were each capable of ending the world, and you tried to hold a small space open between them. And sometimes you held it, and sometimes you filled it with something worse than the space itself. The 5 names, you're still counting.